Good afternoon. Welcome to week 7 of our class on nonviolence and social movements. And I am very honored today to welcome my very good friend, Elise Bryant, who is the national president of the Coalition for Labor Union Women, representing union women all throughout the country. Elise Bryant has a long history in the US labor movement. She worked on the faculty of the National Labor College. She has a long history as a labor educator and also a labor cultural worker. She has directed worker theater. She has led worker choirs. And she is known not only as a labor organizer extraordinaire and a labor educator extraordinaire, but also as an amazing cultural worker who lifts the spirits of everybody she connects with through her song, through her theater, and through her cultural performances. And so we were so happy to have her join us in this conversation today with Reverend James Lawson. So I'd like to first welcome my good friend, Elise Bryant.
Thank you, Kent. It's an honor to be here.
So the first question goes to you, Elise, and that is if you could please talk about the Coalition of Labor Union Women and the role of women within the U.S. labor movement.
Great, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. The Coalition of Labor Union Women was started in 1974. I think we were both maybe running around college campuses around that time, creating good trouble. And they met in Chicago. And at that time, 4,000 women came together in Chicago to say, women have a place in their union. And that place isn't just being a member, that place is also being an activist, but also being in the leadership roles in unions. And so that's been our focus over the years, is getting women engaged and active as members, but also getting elected to office, not just appointed. Because as we know, if you're appointed to office, you can be disappointed. And so one of the things that we figured out was like getting elected means you got a whole body of people who are helping to put you there and to keep you there. So that's been our focus, and we continue to do that. We have our National Executive Board meetings, we have educational conferences, and although COVID-19, took its toll, both in terms of members we lost, but also in terms of, not being able to meet in person, we got right into Zoom right away. One of our members came to us and said, you should try this Zoom thing. I think it'd be really good. And who knew in 2019 that we were spending all this time on Zoom? But we have, so we've been able to stay connected in ways that we wouldn't have otherwise. I mean, we've been having our convention online. We've had our workshop educational conferences online and our meetings online. And so we're still building and growing. And we've had at least Colorado, Nevada, and Minnesota recently contacted us about starting chapters in those states, as well as Georgia. Don't let me forget Georgia. But California, y'all got 4 chapters already, okay? So it's going well.
That's so exciting to hear, Elise, that even during the pandemic, that CLU continues to engage women, union members, and leaders across the country.
Yes.
I wanted you to talk for a minute about some of the challenges, however, because historically, the labor movement has been a very male-dominated institution, and women have not been readily promoted and elected to leadership positions. So how has CLU addressed the challenges within the labor movement in terms of the representation of women?
Well, number one is we've been finding the educational background, because we figured you have to have the skills and the knowledge. That's one piece of it. But then you also have to build a collective and support network in order to do that. You can't run for office by yourself. It just doesn't work. And you can have all the skills and the talent in the world, but if the glass ceiling is on lockdown, you can't get in. So again, one of the goals is helping women, sisters, siblings, build power within their unions. So, and starting at the local level, then at the district level or whatever, regional level, and then at the national level. And when we were going to honor Liz Shuler when she was Secretary Treasurer of the AFL-CIO, Liz didn't want to get the honor by herself. She wanted other women to join in. And we looked at the Executive Council of the AFL-CIO, and you know what we found, right? It's like, how many women are presidents of national or international unions? two, I think, at this point. Randy Weingarten, we know of AFT, of the AFL-CIO. I'm not going to go with NEA because there's a woman there as well. But we still looked around and said, this isn't good enough. And so our effort in this was reelected for office for the next 4 years is to get women elected. I mean, that's our goal. That's like number one. Is we need to get women into those positions, electing those positions, not just one at a time, because you and I both know, as we all learned from Barack Obama, one person is not enough. If you don't have a majority of the Senate or the majority of the House, and it doesn't make any difference. So we want to make sure that happens as well. So it's not just a token woman, because we got a lot of that. We still got that going on. But even at this point in time, there are more women as secretary treasurers of the National International Union than there are as presidents.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And this is a long-term challenge to lift up the leadership of women within the labor movement. And I'm very glad that CLUE is dedicating time, energy, and resources to commit to that challenge. I wanted to now turn to Reverend Lawson, because we've taught this class on nonviolence and social movements many years. And for many of those years, you have consciously and deliberately talked about the movement for the women's right to vote as one of the three critical nonviolent movements of the 20th century. So can you talk about why you have lifted that up as a critical model of nonviolent movements in the 20th century?
Thank you, Kent and Elise. The how you bring about change is as critical to the work you do as is the change you imagine and desire. How is as important as the goal. If the how does not match the significance of the goal, the change will be minimal. That's one of the lessons out of the suffrage movement, in which women began organizing for equal rights around 1837. At one point in the early 20th century, they had 7 million members in 2 large nationwide associations. But they were gaining very little ground in terms of the amendment of voting rights for women in the United States. The 7 million members did not do it. And the reason is the how. And that's why I celebrate the National Women's Political Committee, led by Lucy Burns and Ellis Paul, who around the 1910 began to organize in a more nonviolent way. And they aimed their movement for women's rights at the White House. And they did it with nonviolence. Now, look, it took massive courage for that to happen. It took massive courage. They aimed and targeted the president, and through the president, the Congress, and called for the passing of the amendment. The president was against women having the right to vote, Woodrow Wilson. They entered the war, and the Lucy Burns, Ellis Paul wing, that was relatively small, said, Mr. President, the war in Europe is not the greatest challenge to democracy. The greatest challenge to democracy is the equality of women and the women's right to vote. In other words, they did not really talk about World War I, which the nation was gung-ho for, as we are engaged now in the war between Ukraine and the invasion by Russia. It's got a comparable position, a comparable situation. And these women said, our human rights more important than the war in Europe. And I want to submit this as an illustration. The amendment for the women to have the right to vote that was passed in August, I think, 1920, came through nonviolent behavior, theory, and practice. They picketed the White House steadily in wartime, unheard of. See, with the Ukraine war going on, we're very quiet for campaigns for change. They picket the White House in wartime, and they were called all sorts of names. In fact, over 600 of them faced arrest, and they faced torture in a notorious workhouse in Virginia, a work camp, a prison camp. They engaged in hunger strikes as well as the picketing. They gladly accepted being arrested in front of the White House. And the how matched the challenge. And I've forgotten the year, 1917, I think, Woodrow Wilson made a speech changing his mind. The 19th Amendment was passed by Congress. And in 1920, it was affirmed by the necessary number of states and became the law of the land. So I think my position is that the laboring of the USA people is perhaps the most critical question facing our nation today. Too many people work and receive inadequate compensation and benefits, both economically and politically. And the parties, but the Republican Party is now out of the picture because it is not good for anything right now. We need to put great pressure on the Democratic Party to become the party of all the people through the character of action that is well organized, that is targeted, and that can make some of the changes we need. So the women's suffrage movement did that in a wonderful fashion in my mind. And that's where I feel that we in labor are today. We are not going to get the changes in our society without militant, nonviolent action. We need to learn not to cuss at each other in the labor movement. We need to learn instead to insist that every working family is the family for which the AFL-CIO and the labor movements are responsible. Every working family, whether they are a member of a union or not. We have to take responsibility for all the people of the United States of America. That labor could become the major character for equality, liberty, justice for all, for the eradication of gender discrimination in every institution across the land, the eradication of gender discrimination, and the eradication of racism, and any other kind of discrimination. The labor movement could become the voice for a nation that creatively can lead the world in truth and justice. And the women could be a major, women's clue could be a major point in making this happen.
Thank you for sharing that history, Reverend Lawson, because you have told students in this class, as well as through your many lectures, for your many speeches over the years, about the pernicious nature of plantation capitalism and a particular style of capitalism that is represented in this country that has undermined a true democracy. And even by naming the suffrage movement as part of the rich nonviolent tradition within our country is profound, because it is a continuing struggle to create a true multiracial democracy in this country, which still does not exist. And the fierce attempts to eliminate voting rights for communities of color, for immigrants, and historically suppressing the votes of women is a representation of that lack of a multiracial democracy, and how the philosophy of nonviolence has really helped to transform this country in profound ways. So I wanted to follow up, Elise, with a question specifically. You mentioned that Liz Shuler is now the president of the AFL-CIO. She is the first woman president in the history of the U.S. labor movement. And that's a big deal. And I wanted you to talk about what significance this holds to the U.S. labor movement, but especially now when the U.S. Supreme Court may very well overturn reproductive rights, which have been a part of this nation for the last 50 years. And what a threat that represents, not only to women, but indeed to the civil rights of everyone within this country. So if you could comment on the first president, AFL-CIO, and then especially now, given the threat to reproductive rights.
Absolutely. Liz Shuler her door has been open to me since before I became president of Coalition of Labor Union, when I was just the executive director of the Labor Heritage Foundation. I called up and asked for an appointment with her. We sat down and chatted like old friends. And that's the kind of person she is. She's very down to earth, very, very, just come on in. We're equals. But when she was, we mourned the loss of Rich Trumka. And certainly I didn't see it coming, and nobody else did. But that she was willing to step up and step into that, and that the AFL-CIO elected her as president of the AFL-CIO is a tremendous victory for the labor movement as a whole, and for women in particular in representation. I mean, so we have cracked that glass ceiling, but we know it's only cracked. It's not broken. It's not disappeared yet. But I feel like there's more access in that respect. When I did become president of the Coalition of Labor Union Women, Liz and I sat down with her chief of staff, Christine Neff, and talked about what we need to do to bring women's agenda forward on the AFL-CIO's agenda. And we were talking about that before there was any talk of her becoming president. So I feel like we have access in that respect, and we have a person who understands. We don't have to tell her about it. I mean, she's got a lot to carry and a lot on her shoulders. But I believe that we're still an important part of that, the issues of women, as she's empowered the Women's Committee, which she sat on as Secretary Treasurer. So I'm looking forward to it. I think, and I really want to talk to her about bringing together a town hall meeting around the issues of reproductive rights for women. And this Supreme Court draft opinion to overturn Roe versus Wade is an outrage and an absolute affront to the opinion of the majority of Americans who support a woman's right to reproductive freedom, including a woman's right to terminate a pregnancy. And when I read over the technical language around Roe v. Wade and that decision, I mean, what they were talking about was the privacy, your right to privacy, the right to your own body. We used to march in the streets, for anti-rape marches. We would say, whatever I wear, wherever I go, yes means yes and no means no. It's like, I have a right to decide what happens in my body, and it should be legal and healthy, because that's what happens when it was banned. Wealthy women would go in and get a, quote, D and C, and that would be the end of that pregnancy. And I know that not because I made it up, but because I heard wealthy women feminists talk about how they had access to abortions, safe abortions with their doctors that working class women didn't have. But we had midwives and we had women who could help with that. But even in like 1873, the United States government was trying to get inside of women's bodies with the Comstock laws, right? These were the laws set by the federal government, passed in March of 1873, that said, you know, you criminalize any use of the U.S. Postal Service to any of the following items: obscenity, contraceptions, and abortion patients. I'm not sure if I say abortion patients, but the right access to a divorce to be able to send that through the mail. And that's what they're talking about in 1873. So the fact that women have control over their bodies is a challenge to the system that says, oh no, you're supposed to be here to support. You're just a little lady, stay in the kitchen barefoot and pregnant and take care of the kids and do all that kind of stuff. Well, we know now that taking care of children, raising children is work. And the people who are paying all that money for childcare can testify that unpaid labor that women did, when African Americans did unpaid labor, it was called slavery. When women do it, it's called motherhood. But it's the same thing. And that right to privacy and that right to our bodies is something that I think we can definitely mobilize around. And get, it's already mobilized. What am I saying? You know, it's like already marching at the Supreme Court. But this is a time to really bring out working women around the country. Because I don't care if you're in a union or not. I think every working class and working woman understands, and a lot of the men as well, you know, who are also get it, who are allies, that this is a right to preserve one's privacy and one's right to health and well-being, and also the toll it takes to have children when you don't have a job, when you have a job that's a part-time, you're working at Amazon, or you're working at Walmart, or you're working some other place with underpaid wages, even though they're trying to pay 20 at Amazon now. It's still not enough. People are working 2 or 3 jobs, and a lot of women are doing that, plus take care of the parents. So yeah, we have a lot on our agenda, but this is the time. We were born for this time, right? And these are the leaders we've been looking for. And next generation sisters who are coming up, I'm with them. Good, put our pink pussy hats and get out there.
Well, Elise, I'm really thrilled that as the president of the Coalition of Labor Union Women, that you have a close friendship and partnership with the first woman president of the AFL-CIO. It is also significant that the Secretary Treasurer is African American. And so this is the first time in history of the AFL-CIO where you have a woman president and a person of color as the Secretary Treasurer. And amazing. It is amazing. And I do think that this is a challenging time when the US Supreme Court is not only attacking women's rights, but are attacking workers' rights, are attacking rights of communities of color. And so I do think that there is tremendous organizing potential. I wanted to, bring Reverend Lawson into this conversation because essentially what the U.S. Supreme Court is trying to do is to eliminate federal rights and transfer the right to set laws with regard to reproductive rights back to the states. And we know that's what's going to happen, that you have these conservative state legislatures, conservative governors who will be rolling back the clock on a whole host of rights that people have fought for and won in years past. But I want you to talk, from your vantage point, because this is not the first time that we've had this tension where people have raised this issue of states' rights as a way of undermining, forward-looking progressive change and human progress.
Well, Kent, my lifelong work has centered in the notion that political, social, economic change can happen even in the worst of situations. I am convinced that Gandhi, Mohandas K. Gandhi of India, in calling nonviolent struggle or satyagraha a science for social change, for a science for transformation that is both personal and social. And I sense that the major issue in the United States is not the people who largely know that their situation could be better, and who want change, though they may not be willing to themselves participate in it. In labor circles, there is a great amount of angst over the fact that the bottom 60 to 80% of the American people have found their benefits stay at the same place or decrease, while benefits for the top 10, 20% of the American people economically and otherwise have gone up. And while a 5% set of people in the United States have made vast money from inheriting money and then investing the money they've inherited, and therefore achieving billions and billions and billions of dollars in all sorts of ways, being able to do venture capitalism and whatnot. So my think in the matter is that AFL-CIO and labor unions must give attention to how we get expressed the equity of life for the millions of people that we represent. And we already represent enough people. It doesn't matter to me whether it's 13 million or 50 million. We represent enough people that if we organize ourselves systematically with campaigns strategically placed, studying our situation and all the local situations, we can see something happen. Now, and I lift up Los Angeles as an example of that. I think Local 11, Unite Here, in Maria Elena Durasso, and reaching out for me in 1980 and saying to me, will you teach us nonviolence? And are doing, at least across the early years, at least 3 or 4 systematic workshops on nonviolent methodology for bringing about social change. And the Los Angeles union movement has been profoundly changed by that phone call that Maria Elena Durasso made. In the same way, back in the 60s, Martin King and I shook hands on February the 6th, 1957. And Martin King, I was planning to do my graduate degrees and then move south. Had that on my mind for at least a decade or more. Martin King said to me, sitting across the table, come now, we can't wait. And this is, of course, within the first year of the Montgomery bus boycott, which had just ended January 17, 1957, 381 days, and was the introduction of nonviolent struggle, which is, I want to make this clear, and why it's why John Lewis said that within the civil rights movement, there is also the nonviolent movement of America. The sit-in campaigns, the Freedom Ride, the Montgomery bus boycott, the Memphis sanitation strike, the Mississippi Slaughter, the voting rights campaign of '55. These were all protracted campaigns year after year that laid the issue of the equality of all human beings, the ending of segregation and racism in all its forms. And that has been the most important movement ever here on this continent. More important than 1776. More important, because more issues on the well-being of human beings, which is essential, have been laid on the tables during and since the 1960s. No other movement has had the ramifications and Robert Kennedy talked about dropping a rock in a lake and you see the rings move from the rock. Wow, the movement of the 1960s, of Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King movement, which is what I call it oftentimes, has done more to create change for the United States than any other movement previously. But now in the 22nd century, We need the labor movement to come up. In some places, it's already come alive, but we need the labor movement because only the labor movement has as a central feature the well-being of all working peoples and families. No other entity in the United States has that as a major goal, the AFL-CIO. So the AFL-CIO, in my mind, must decide to become the militant agency for the well-being of the American people. In the 60s, the Chamber of Commerce never voted for Head Start, never voted for the Voting Rights Bill of 55, did not want the Civil Rights Bill of 64. The Chamber of Commerce never did, you see. It was AFL-CIO, was a major, perhaps the major national agency in the country that supported all of that legislature that came out of that movement through the good offices of the Urban League, the NAACP, Congress of Racial Equality, the addition of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I maintain our nation could be far advanced if people who know that their condition has to change, if activism in the United States, especially, I'm going to say this very plainly, Elise, especially if white progressives put their energy around nonviolent campaigns for economic, political, cultural justice and stop allowing USA culture to muffle, to smother their own visions of what the nation has to be. If we don't do it, we're going to be in great trouble. There's no way in 2022 that the Democratic Party should be thinking that we're going to lose the 2022 election or the 2024. Not with a Republican Party that's saying some of the things it's saying, that offering leadership that's going nowhere. There's no way we should allow the media to be saying that Democrats will lose 2022, 2024. If that happens, it will be our fault. It'll be our fault. It will be our responsibility. And history will hold us accountable because we have the tools to do the kind of strategic thinking and behaving that will forge the public conversation, that will put on the table the fundamental issues that are today affecting too many people poorly, but can be reversed to affect all 330 million of us in a genuinely mutual family fashion. We can be a far more just nation than what we are, especially economically.
This approach is so critical, Reverend Lawson, because in this class, when we are talking about the historic struggles where nonviolence has helped to change the course of history, and we're talking today about the women's movement. We're talking about the nonviolent struggles of the 50s and 60s. Last week, we talked about the transformation of the Los Angeles labor movement, led in large part by your counsel with regard to infusing the philosophy of nonviolence. And at a national level, there is tremendous organizing opportunities if the US labor movement will seize the day. And so I wanted to go back to Elise because we see for the first time an Amazon facility has successfully unionized in Staten Island. We see dozens and dozens of Starbucks facilities across the country who are now organizing and unionizing. We see fast food workers. We see gig workers, Uber and Lyft drivers. Many of these organizing campaigns are not being led by unions themselves, but reflect the tremendous sentiment among young workers and women workers in particular to make change. And so I wanted to ask you about what you see going on in the country with regard to this new wave of organizing and what you think that it holds for the future.
how exciting. Is it not? I'm just like, it's happening all over the country. And people are saying, oh, these are young folks. Well, so are the Ruther brothers, when they started organizing the auto workers. I mean, this is where it starts. I mean, this is at the roots. This is where it begins, not at the top. And so the AFL-CIO, being at the top of the pyramid, can gain from this and can support it. And I think that that's what's really important. And I see that with some of the unions who are stepping in and helping in with these folks who are organizing independent unions, because it's literally the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, tore the final curtain off. The wizard's been there, they're going, don't pay any attention to what's happening back here, when they've been manipulating, as you know, with the pernicious nature of capitalism has been going on. And this pandemic tore that curtain off. So literally, I mean, the Greek word for, that is apocalypse. It doesn't mean the end of the world. It means an uncovering. And so this generation of folks who are in these plants are looking around going, hey, we're being worked like wage slaves. We're being worked for little or nothing with no benefits whatsoever. And the cost of living is so incredibly high as opposed to the wages that people make. On $20 an hour, you can't live in Washington, D.C. on $20 an hour with just one job, right? And so I think that we, the Newspaper Guild, which is what the local that I belong to, 32035, the Washington Baltimore News Guild, we've been getting outreach from lots of nonprofit organizations. Major nonprofit social justice organizations. The staff is reaching out to us and saying, hey, we want a union. Newspapers, smaller newspapers, bigger newspapers, the staff of newspapers that actually do the technical work, the IT, they're organizing. And I think that this is that opportunity. We're there where the labor movement, the established labor movement, can help by providing resources, by buying support, by helping to put bodies out there when we need it. Because I totally agree with Reverend Lawson, of course, that you got to have some action. You got to have some nonviolent action. They're not going to pay any attention to us, just going, hey, look, could y'all be nicer to us? No. So I think that that's where we come in. I think that's where the national labor movement and local labor movement comes in to help with these organizing campaigns. And we're saying at the Guild, like, some of these shops are really small. Well, gosh, golly, do we just turn them away because they're small? No. We may not be the final union they work with, but we're going to work with them to get there, because that's our responsibility to help. And this is what solidarity is about, right? Reaching out to each other, supporting each other in any way we can. Physically, spiritually, monetarily, and with our real blood sweat.
Thank you, Elise. We've had some extraordinary leaders from the labor movement come share their reflections that address the necessity of social justice unionism, of a future of the labor movement that is deeply committed to making fundamental social change that impacts the entire U.S. working class, not just the group of unionized workers today. And the last time the AFL-CIO convention was held in Los Angeles back in 2013, Reverend Lawson gave a powerful address that challenged some of the pro-corporate leanings of the Democratic Party and a certain reliance by certain business union leaders within the American labor movement that saw an alignment with the Democratic Party as the end-all and be-all of the agenda of unions. And so Reverend Lawson was quite eloquent and quite challenging in terms of sharing a different vision for what the labor movement must do. And so I was wondering, Reverend Lawson, has your thoughts or your analysis changed at all since that presentation made back at the AFL-CIO convention almost 10 years ago?
No, I'm going to say it probably has changed in some details, but it hasn't changed in the stubbornness of my thought and position that the labor movement could become the major catalyst for the United States making changes across the board, especially as we have noticed the local unions in Los Angeles that say boldly, we are a social justice union, and everything that affects our membership affects the union. The union has to be concerned for the total life of our members and families, as well as for the working people who are not joining the union. So I happen to think that working families moving through organized unions can cause our nation to become a nation more just and fair, not to the top 5%, but to 100%, 90% or 100% of the people. And I think nonviolence can do that. One of the themes of nonviolent struggle is this, that every member of a union, or according to some of the scholarship that's been done in the last 20 years, 5% or 10% of the members of a union can bring about massive change. They don't have to have 100%. The studies of violent and nonviolent change movements over the last 100 years by Erica Chenoweth has indicated that you only need an organized effort and only needs about 3.4% of the people behind their plan, and they'll get the plan carried out, especially if that 3.4% is well organized, has pulled together a struggle community. I maintain a justice community to support it. In Memphis, in the Memphis sanitation strike in '68, that was, we clergy came together and put together a strategy committee to help the sanitation strike. Here in Los Angeles, we have an organization called the Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. And so we try to bring in, I say that bringing in the communities, the support, the families in the community that work through unions is a bold strategic point that can make a difference in this country. Within our labor forces, we need to stop cussing each other out. We need to learn the language of community, what some of our predecessors around the 1909 called the beloved community, where your language expresses not only your goals, your hopes and dreams, but also expresses your respect for one another in the union itself. And we need to stop cussing out our opponents. And here I maintain that the ancient teacher, Jesus of Nazareth, in spite of all the stuff that Christianity has put around him, in my mind, Jesus said, you can love the enemy. What did he mean by that? He did not mean you can become close, intimate friends with the enemy, or you can start up a romance with the enemy. He did not even mean that you could have a brotherly, sisterly friendship with the enemy. He meant that the enemy has to be seen as a fellow human being, and you organize your campaign in such a way that the enemy has a space to become a friend. You give the enemy time and space to change his mind. And the chief weapon for the enemy changing the mind is the kind of nonviolent demonstrations and behaviors and campaigns that are disciplined and orderly and know what they're trying to do. That makes a public dramatization that tells the enemy something's going on here, that I know something is wrong, but there's something also right at the same moment. So it's not a gun or a sword, because they threaten people's sense of well-being. It's a street drama. It's a dramatic action in which the demonstrators, the activists, demonstrate through their action and their behavior that what we are doing is right, and you need to think about joining our side. And we saw this. And I have not tried to study this personally, but I know that, and I don't know how many other people, how many scholars have begun to study it, but I know that when the hunger strike with Maria Elena Durasso and Local 11 with USC, I know it struck a responsive chord publicly in Los Angeles, in which many people who were sitting on the fence got on the side of the union and left supporting USC, in which other people joined the campaign by participating in the marches, in the hunger strike, and in some of the other activities for that campaign. And we saw this happen in the Memphis sanitation strike. We saw it happen in Selma, Alabama, to Montgomery. We saw it happen in Montgomery. We saw it happen with the Freedom Ride. And it can still happen. And that's why I am pretty stubborn about saying that working families and unions especially must learn the theory and the practice of nonviolent strategic campaigns, because that will make a difference.
Thank you.
Look how, for example, Georgia has 2 Democratic senators. Labor played a major role in that happening. Arizona has 2 Democratic senators. Labor played a critical role in making this happen. California has become all the way a Democratic nation, a state in the sense that our congressional representatives, our senators are all Democrats. Labor played a major role in this happening. And I just simply insist that the National AFL-CIO needs to get on the side of this kind of activism. They are in some cases, but they are not in many other cases. The construction unions don't have that much to say to the janitors union or to local, or to Unite Here. So the union movement, by becoming more united in their common sense of things we can accomplish, will become a powerful force for justice for working families.
Thank you so much for sharing that reflection, that how social movements grow, how they are created, how they are nurtured, this notion of the beloved community in terms of what brings people together on a common vision for the future, and that indeed a social movement does not take 70 or 80 or 90 or 100% of the people to lead it. That if you have a disciplined core of organized people who share a common vision, that you indeed can grow and build a movement. We've seen that time and again from many of the social movements we have discussed and highlighted. And yet, what you also point out is true, that at the national labor movement level, there is still fierce contention between a notion of social justice unionism versus a notion of business unionism that is dedicated to the protection of what little unions have now, and is really not engaged in building a movement or speaking on behalf of the working class. They're speaking based on their own self-interest. And so I do think that we have seen models of success, and we do really need to look at ways that we can lift this up at the national level.
But Kent, in Los Angeles, we have discovered, however, that the construction unions, for an example, with the backing of big construction companies, will permit all sorts of bullying and taunting on the job against women, against Black people, Hispanic people. Taunting that oftentimes will keep Black workers from wanting to stay in construction. So the movement cannot work with certain, if the engineers love their wages from the war industry, but do not have, therefore, the insight and character to unite here, then we're in great trouble. So the union movement itself, the teachers, the engineers, the construction workers, the carpenters, the waiters, the hotel workers, the union must itself become enough of a power tool of people so that they can put on in their localities various kinds of direct action campaigns that can change our entire society. And at this point, again, like Kent Wong, Los Angeles is a critical illustration of it.
Thank you so much.
Because we've done it. And my we is a plural we.
So our time is coming to a close, but I did want to ask Elise Bryant, in addition to serving as the president of the Coalition of Labor Union Women, and in addition to your work as a labor educator over many years, you've also served as the executive director of the Labor Heritage Foundation and have played a key role in lifting up the role of culture in growing and building the labor movement. So I wanted you to reflect on what you see the role of culture is in growing and sustaining social justice movements, and how indeed it is an expression of nonviolence.
Thank you, Kent. And thank you, Reverend Lawson, for that meditation on enemies and friends and bringing folks together, because that was that made me stop for a moment. But also, I'm reflecting too that the question you asked, Kent, is about culture. And culture, I only took one language, that was Latin, is the Latin word for care. And we cultivate something is how we care for it. And music, movement, the spoken word, the arts are the food that feed our souls. And in the civil rights movement, that was just understood. It was given. It was given because a lot of the leaders were leaders from religious groups, from other, churches and synagogues. But and largely, because it was African American, song was a part of it. It just was a part of it because that's a part of our culture and nature. It's what we brought with us from Africa. I tell people all the time, I say, why do you always got to sing? Well, I don't sing because I think I have the greatest voice. I sing not because I was born in Africa, because Africa was born in me. And so, the first time I came to the Great Labor Arts Exchange was how I knew about the Labor Heritage Foundation. Reverend James Orange was leading us in song. And I walked in the room and I was the only Black person other than Reverend Orange. And he was, ain't gonna let nobody turn us around, turn us around. And I had to sing because I knew the song, of course. And I looked around the room and all these people were singing with us and they were singing in 4-part harmony. I thought, I think I found another part of my tribe. And now when I'm on picket lines and rallies, starting with a song, leading songs, and people don't understand the power of song is that when we sing together, we breathe together. And when we breathe together, our hearts synchronize together. So when Reverend Lawson, Reverend King, and all the folks were in jail cells and they're singing, that singing brought power. And it scares people when you sing like that. And so I really look to the next generation who are bringing hip hop to it. And it's like, I've been saying, yeah, bring that hip hop. You can use some of our old songs in it, but also make that repeatable chorus, because you need something where everybody can do it together, to breathe together, to synchronize our hearts together. So I'm very excited about the next generation of cultural workers that are coming up, and understanding how important it is to have music, movement, the spoken word in the work that we do, on the picket lines, at the rallies, because that's when we come together as one. That's union, right? Union is one. Us, me and you together, you and I on union.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Elise Bryant, President of the Coalition for Labor Union Women. Any last words, Reverend Lawson, before we close today's session?
Well, I think the music has to follow strategic thinking, creating goals for change, for advancement of truth and justice, and then the direct dramatization that allows people to see both the change that's needed, but then how it can happen.
The head and the heart working together.
Thank you so much for those concluding remarks, Reverend Lawson, and thank you so much for joining us, Elise Bryant.
Thank you, Kent. Thank you, Reverend Lawson.
Thanks, Kent.